Good morning, Hale Center. Whoops, they froze. Hale Center, oh, I can see myself on there, so I know they can see me. That's kind of, can you see it in the back? Oh, I had the screen set up.
We're here.
Yeah, okay. Kind of, more or less, huh?
They're trickling in.
Who are you guys playing football with?
Highland Park.
I don't even know where that is.
It's in Amarillo.
Okay. Well, I was fixing the notes and readings because I suddenly discovered, and no one brought to my attention, that you guys didn't have copies of the PowerPoints that I've been flashing up on the board. Well, it's the first week, so we'll go through that. I'm working on a calendar for you. I went back and I looked at the chart that's got the schedule on there, and there's all sorts of funny things on it that I don't like. I made it, I should know better, but so I got rid of that thing, and as soon as I get this calendar functional, it'll have everything on it, like when your exams are and the whole 9 yards. I won't have all the assignments on it, but I'll at least have the exams and I'll have the quizzes marked out. The person that designed this probably wasn't a full-time teacher, so there's some things on here that are a little bit awkward for an instructor to use. That's how things go. You know, the world's run by the bean counters, and the people that do things are kind of left on the side. I'm always fighting that in the institutions where I work, whether it's the military or what. You know, the generals make big lines on maps, but it's a little guy that's got to walk where those lines go. I noticed that a lot. When I was working in the agency, we ran a special operation, and they were going to float a raft down a river to sneak into this country. And they drew beautiful lines on the map, and here's where we're going to go with the equipment and all that. And I looked at the map, and I have what you call mensuration equipment, where I can measure things from a satellite. And I asked them, I held my hand up and said, "What do you want?" And I said, "What about those 150-foot waterfalls?" "What waterfalls?" "Read your map, friend." Oops. They are going to have to go up the river. They don't care. Anyway, okay, let's take a look. Now, we were kind of talking about setting the scene for exploration. And I might go back and review some of the things that we talked about and all of that. But what I want to do really is move forward and talk about the countries that really led the way in exploration. When we get done talking about Portugal and Spain just a little bit, and I'll try and get that done maybe in this hour, then we'll talk a little bit about the influence of two things, if you want to call institutions, maybe I shouldn't call them institutions, but two things that influenced all of this. One of them is the subject of slavery, and the other one is the subject of religion. And the relationship both of those things have to exploration and colonization are kind of push-pull. Sometimes they're very, very positive, pushing towards going out and exploring and colonizing and things like that. And sometimes they actually block and keep people occupied with other things so they don't go out. So some countries don't go out and explore right away. That explains a little bit why Portugal and Spain kind of ran in front of the crowd at the beginning. Other people were occupied with other issues. Okay, let me get out of what I'm up on here, and I'll put this up on the screen so you can see it. I'm going to start using, and it's available if you want to follow along on your own computer. It's available in Notes and Readings for Unit 1 now. It's the Portuguese and the Spanish. It's a PowerPoint. I'll try not to totally base everything I say on it, but it should pop up on your notes and readings, because this screen's going to get blurry. Either the screen's blurry or I'm blurry. I don't know which. It is kind of in the morning. I don't know. How about you guys? You look at the screen, and you're sure it's the screen and not just your bloodshot eyes from going out partying or studying too late or something? You had to work last night.
Yeah.
Listen to these regular students in here. They're crying about having to go to work and things like that, and how rough life is. And everybody in the classroom is dreaming about, when can I get out of the house and be away from mom and dad? All the people in this room are dreaming, could I just go back and live with mom and dad for a while? Mom tends to wash the clothes for me.
Cooks, cleans, it's the best.
Oh, when you, I lived in Washington D.C., and when I was working at the State Department and at the agency in Washington D.C., there was a big name college called Georgetown. And I wanted to mail something, go to one of those pack and mail places and mail something. And I went in there, and the whole wall of this building was just totally covered with stacks of boxes. And I mean, from the front of this place all the way to the back and then across the back. And I asked the guy at the counter, what is that? And he said, it's all the kids sending their dirty clothes home to mom. And I thought, oh, it must be nice to be a rich kid. Anyway, okay. Let's look at this Portugal and Spain thing. The Portuguese actually went first. They opened the way in terms of technology. They opened the way in terms of just getting it done. Ferdinand and Isabella, King of Aragon, Queen of Castile, and their alliance were busy still fighting the Moors. The Portuguese helped a little bit. They'd been fighting them too. But from about 1300 on, the main part of the fighting for the territory around Portugal was done. So they're starting to look outward. They need money. They want to do business with the Orient the way that the city-states of Venice and Genoa are doing. There's a lot of money in that. They want to do things like find where the gold is coming from that they keep noting is going across the Sahara Desert in the hands of the Arabs. They also have a problem with pirates. Pirates that cut off their access to the Mediterranean Sea. And as we go through here, at one point or another, you'll see a map of the Mediterranean with all the lines of trade through it, and you'll quickly realize that that was kind of the center of the European world as far as trade was concerned. So the pirate problem was a very real one, and the Portuguese are going to finally figure out that they have to do something about it because it's hurting them. The pirates were perched all along the northern coast of Africa, facing into the Mediterranean, and also part of it facing out into the Atlantic. Early on in Portugal, you had a whole series of kings. Got that memorized? Here, memorize this quickly, right? Okay, you've got it all down? Next slide. There's another whole row of kings. This is the House of Avis. This is when the kings started really getting central power and really getting their countries organized. Thank you. Nobody out there in Hill Center sees anything. They're all saying, what's Mr. Hunt talking about? Come on, machine. Every time it blinks, it's trying to put that. There it is. You got that memorized? So I can just put up a picture and you can tell me which king it is? Okay. House of Avis got it started, and that guy whose name is spelled Joal, that's actually John the First. That's Portuguese for John. I'm not going to try and pronounce it. Can anybody speak Portuguese in here? It's his son that's one of the major impetuses for this. His son, Henry, it's his third son, young fellow that didn't want to be king. A lot of young sons wanted to, kick their father off the throne and take over. But John's son was interested in other things. And he told his daddy, he said, we're running out of slaves because they don't have any more POWs left from the Reconquista. I know there's gold somewhere coming into the Sahara. I'd like to find out where it is. We got to deal with these pirates. And he persuades his father and his older brothers to invade the northern coast of Africa to try and wipe out the pirate letters, and they succeed, at least temporarily, in wiping them out. But that kind of is the big kickoff for going south. Of course, the overruling thing that they're looking for is a way to get to China. And the reason they can't get to China is it's getting more and more difficult to go across the Mediterranean and then overland because of the Ottoman Empire growing bigger and bigger and bigger and dominating that area. So they're looking for an alternate route. On this little map, you can see a little town that had most of the pirates in that they didn't like. It was a little town called Ceuta on the north coast of Africa. I think now it's a part of Morocco, maybe Spanish Morocco, I can't remember. Here's what they were trying to do. If Prince Henry was trying to sell it, he was giving the little presentation to try and sell it that we all learn about in speech one, how to make a presentation, and then stop the pirate attacks, find the source of gold, get some slaves, and find an alternate land route. Not necessarily in any order of precedence. There was one other little thing that we kind of laugh at and don't pay any attention. Some of them really, really wanted to find the lost kingdom of Prester John. You can read up on the lost kingdom of Prester John. I'm not going to waste a lot of time. It was supposed to be, it was kind of like the land version of the story about the sunken kingdom of Atlantis. And it moved around because they would go and explore an area thinking they would find it, and it wasn't there, so they thought, oh, it must be somewhere else, and they go look for it somewhere else. Even up to the time that the Spanish came to the Americas, they were still looking for some of the things in the Lost Kingdom. Ponce de Leon went to Florida looking for the Fountain of Youth. I'm here to tell you he didn't find it, because I'd be drinking out of it right now. There's a map that shows you some of the different paths across the Sahara Desert. Mainly established by people coming from the Arabian Peninsula, which is, see if I can get the pointer to work, is way over here. And that's where Islam started. Along that western coast of the Arab Peninsula, you have Medina and Mecca. And they spread into Africa first. That was the first place that Islam really spread fast. But the Portuguese have noticed while they were fighting the Islamic people that we'll call the Moors, just because it's easy to spell, and that's what all historians lumped them together. There were a lot of different people. They realized that things like very valuable spices and gold and ivory were coming across the desert, and they wanted maybe to cut out the middleman and find out where it was coming from. So, let's see what else we've got. There's old Henry. When these old guys had their portraits taken, of course, the painter, if he wanted to make any money on it, he had to make them look good. So you always wonder about how accurate the pictures are. But anyway, he had a lot of honor showered on him by his father. His father basically set him up to be a very, very wealthy man. Because he put him in charge of exploration wherever they went in Africa. Whatever they gained out of going to Africa, that was his profit. And so he controlled the very southern tip of Portugal, and he controlled kind of parts of not actually the territory in Africa, but the process of exploring and trade with Africa. Lots of monopolies. So he was happy not to be the king. There's some of the places you don't need to memorize, but I just want you to see the progress. In his lifetime, they got down to about Cape Bojador. That's not very far down the African coast. The reason he's so important about it was that he organized it. And all the way up until about 1460, he did things like organizing schools of navigation. He funded the building of ships that were suited for what they were doing. Remember when they navigated then, remind me to go back to the slide. When they navigated again, then they preferred to see the coastline. And navigators worked on land sightings. If you've taken your trig yet, you can triangulate and figure out where you are and how far off you are and things like that. Also, they would scrape the bottom and find out whether it was sandy, it had certain kinds of rocks, or what it had down on the bottom. And they would collect all this data, put it in a little book that the English called a rudder, R-U-T-T-E-R. It's hard to find in a lot of dictionaries. The French called it a routier, but basically it was a set of navigation notes on how to get from point A to point B. They didn't like to go way far out to the west, out of sight of land, because they couldn't calculate how far east and west you were until the 1700s. They could calculate north and south, but not east and west. Anyway, let me see if I can find some of the technology. Some of it was in navigation, some of it was in ships. They needed a ship that could sail close to the wind. What do you mean close to the wind, Mr. Hunt? By the way, guys, who was it? Was it Hale Center? Somebody sent me a message and asked me about the witching hour. Come on, fess up. Who sent me a question and said, we're all asking each other what the witching hour is? Did you see my answer?
Yes, one question.
You guys, if more than one of you pushes that microphone, it's going to give you feedback like nobody's business and blast your ears out. What we heard out here was a big roar. We didn't really hear much voice. You don't need to get close to the mic, and you need to turn off all the other mics. I think they're off now. Post had a little practice at this over the years. Post, you notice I'm not talking about football games? I'm being real nice. Who's Post gonna play this week? Is it as far away as the last game?
No, it's a home game.
Oh, good, okay. I think all your guys were asleep on the bus when they got down to that last game. They probably didn't wake up until maybe the end of the game. Post is a pretty big football power, and last week wasn't a good week for them. Okay, so let's see what kind of gizmos we've got. Once again, you don't need to memorize this. I'm just showing you for the sake of interest. These are some of the things that they used to help them. They would observe the sun or stars sometimes and try and calculate their longitude. They tried to calculate their latitude, but it was just too darn difficult because they needed to know what time it was. Oh, thank you, Madam Director. There you go. Some of those things are kind of crude. Some of them look pretty sophisticated. There's one that's a lot more sophisticated because the Davis Quadrant was done a lot later than what we're talking about now. It was in the late 1500s. And of course they had magnetic compasses around from somewhere around 1200, but they didn't have gimbals. What's a gimbal all about? That's that set of things so that when the ship rocks, in theory the compass stays flat. Otherwise it makes it really hard to read it. And if you can't keep straight what latitude is and what longitude is, there's a little slide in there for you too. Oh, look at that confusion. Those are winds out over the Indian Ocean. You notice if you look at it, in the Indian Ocean, there's a bunch of red, or kind of reddish lines and then blue lines going in opposite directions. And that part of the Indian Ocean, for about 6 months, the wind blew one way, and then for the next 6 months, it blew the other way. And if you could figure that out, you could use a crude, they used reed mat sails and things like that. You could get across that ocean all right and get home. It wasn't that way out in the Atlantic, which is one of the reasons they didn't try the Atlantic very much, except within sight of land. Here's one of the ships they developed in the time of Henry the Navigator. The one on the left is called a caravel. It's a fairly lightweight ship as ships go, even as wooden ships go. And it has what they call lateen rigs. You can see that on the slide, L-A-T-E-E-N. That's something worth remembering because it's probably going to be on a test somewhere along the line. They also had really good rudders instead of big long oars that some ships had used to steer with. Excuse me. And just as importantly, they had a keel, which was just a sharp ridge, sometimes more developed in later years. Some of them are made of metal, along the bottom of the ship, which kept the ship from sliding sideways when the wind tended to want to push it sideways. If you put the lateen rig, which is an aerodynamic sail, somebody tell me, how does the sail make you go? I know that sounds like a stupid, simple question. It's not. How does this sail make a ship go? Does the wind get behind you and push you? Anybody, come on. I know you haven't seen a lot of sailing ships up in the Hale Center, nor in Post. Maybe on the little lake down there in Post, I don't know. The point I'm making is, originally when people were using wind power, they put these big mats up, and the wind would push the mat, right? And the boat would go. With a little luck. And if the wind was blowing the wrong direction, you're out of luck. But what you're looking at on that slide is an aerodynamic sail. And that sail, you're not being pushed, you're being pulled. Because the wind, once that sail fluffs out, it's got that curve. What's it remind you of? If you're thinking of engineering or anything, it's like the wing of an airplane. It develops lift. Except in this case, it's horizontal lift. It pulls you with the wind going around the shape of the sail like that. You have lower air pressure on one side of the sail and higher on the other side. Now, with just putting one of those big mats up there, there's one direction you can go, whichever way the wind's blowing. But if you have an aerodynamic sail, you can almost aim right at the wind and still go forward. Not quite. If you get right at the wind, that's what they call too close to the wind, and you're not going anywhere but backwards. But you can go at an angle to the wind, and that wind's still going to go over your boat out sail, and it's still going to pull you. Now, it's going to try and pull you, maybe, let's say, off to the left, make you slide off to the left, but you've got a keel. And the keel wants to hold you straight. And if you get into physics or anything, you have what you call vectors. So the keel's trying to make you go straight, and the wind's trying to make you go off to the left, and so you split that roughly in half, and that's the way your boat goes. And by using that effect, you can sail in a lot more directions than you could if you just had that big old flat mat. And that's what they developed when Henry the Navigator was there, and that was incredibly important. And even when you use square sails, and not triangular sails like the Latines, you can do that. You can develop that same aerodynamic pull. So that was a tremendous jump forward. You think, well, sails? That's a technological jump forward? Of course it was. That made it possible for these guys to go all the way down the coast of Africa, go up the little mouths of rivers. The boats were light enough. You could go fairly up as long as the river was even halfway navigable. And you could look around that way. You could explore and then go on further on down. The big old ships like the Carrack, that's also on that slide on the right-hand side, they were ocean-going ships, and you couldn't go up any inlet because you'd go aground. But they all started using aerodynamic sails in the 1300s, moving into the 1400s. One other thing, and then we're going to get away from science, and that's ocean currents. This is kind of an interesting thing. What happens were that people were coming from Lisbon or Lagos and going south along the coast of Africa, but they were afraid to go too far because they lost the wind advantage, and then they couldn't turn around and go home because of the wind and the sea current. And somewhere along the line, in the late 1300s maybe, or maybe the early 1400s, somebody drifted off away from shore, and when he got a certain distance out there, and we're talking miles, out from shore, he found currents that went the other way. And they call that effect the Volta do Mar Largo. And aha, now we can get home. So once again, with technology, they're encouraged to go a little bit further. And the other thing they learned about was something called gyres. That chart doesn't tell you much. In our ocean, and you can do an experiment at home. You pick the place, your kitchen sink, the toilet, bathtub, and let the water go down the drain. Because of the motion of the Earth, north of the equator, the predominant currents go clockwise. There's 5 major gyres in the world: North Atlantic, South Atlantic, Indian Ocean, Pacific. Here's the experiment. Actually do the dishes. I'm sure nobody does the dishes anymore. You put it in the dishwasher, right? Mr. Brown, we can't do that one. Okay, well, fill the bathtub up. Whatever. Let the water out. It will always rotate in the same direction. It will always rotate clockwise, unless you take a quick trip down to Rio de Janeiro and do it down there, and it will go counterclockwise. And it all has to do with the rotation of the Earth making it do that. The combination of the motion of the Earth and inertia. Anyway, all of these things nobody had ever paid attention to before when they were doing their big rowboats and all that. Suddenly, all this added focus to this, especially thanks to Prince Henry, added to the knowledge of people so they could sail further. They're still not willing to go across the Atlantic quite yet. There's old Prester John. You can look at this slide about Prester John. The only thing I care about that Prester John had in his kingdom was a fountain of youth, and I've been looking for that for years. If anybody has any clues about that, let me know. Okay, out of all the Portuguese, I've already told you one of them that I want you to remember, and that's Prince Henry the Navigator. Usually on the test I'll say, who was Prince Henry? And then I'll say, was he the son of? And since you know he was Portuguese, obviously he's the son of the King of Portugal. It's easy to answer on the test. There were 2 Portuguese guys. Now there are things, political things going on in Portugal. But after Henry died, they were still exploring. And in 1487, a guy by the name of Bartolomeo Diaz, and I want you to remember his name. Just write Bartholomew, that's close enough. We'll anglicize it, right? After all, we're Americans, we speak English. Well, kind of. English don't think we speak English, but the Spanish don't think the Mexicans speak Spanish either, so. Anyway, Diaz got down to the tip end of Africa, almost the tip end. And the cape down there is now called the Cape of Good Hope. It had several different names, and finally that won out. And then his crew decided they weren't willing to go any further because they didn't know what was any further, and they wanted to go home to mama. So he ended up having to turn around and go back. And it's going to be almost exactly 10 years because of different things going on at home before someone really tries to do the whole thing. And it'll be a guy named Vasco da Gama. And Vasco da Gama is not only going to get to the Cape of Good Hope, he's going all the way around, up the east coast of Africa, and across the Indian Ocean to the Indian subcontinent. By the way, there was no country named India there either. And eventually, this is opening the door for Portuguese exploration. Let me see if I can find another map for later exploration. Yeah, they're going to go around the Indian subcontinent, all along where Bangladesh, Burma are now. They weren't then. Well, Burma was. Through the Straits of Malacca, in between the island of Sumatra, which is part of Indonesia now, and the Malay Peninsula, which has Singapore and Malaya on it. The Straits of Malacca, and then they pass up north and head for China and Japan, or go straight west and find the Spice Islands called the Moluccas. Is that going to confuse you enough? You got the Moluccans and then the Moluccas. And in the Moluccas, I had to make a slide of that just to make you really confused. In the Moluccas, you have islands that have rare spices. One of them is cloves. I think we talked about that. Did we mention when I said one of the reasons for wanting to go to China for spices? Cloves are that very pungent little seed is what you take out of the plant. And if you crush it and get oil out of it, that oil will numb your skin. So if you've ever had Novocaine shot into you, just before they take that horrendous big needle with the Novocaine, they swab your mouth with a little Q-tip, and it's got some smelly stuff on it. That's clove oil. And they've got synthetic stuff like it, but clove oil works really well. Sometimes, for like TV performers and people that their throats wear out, like lecturers like me, they've got throat spray. That stuff's got clove oil in it. That was the only place it grew in the whole world. So it's going to become a really sought after commodity. There are a lot of things over there. But anyway, the long story short, the Portuguese, by 1540 some odd, 1543, made it all the way to Japan. In fact, they take credit for giving the Japanese the first guns. Whether that's good or bad is another story. It altered Japanese history, though. Then Spain, remember Spain, right? Spain that doesn't exist, but we'll call them Spain anyway. Isabel and Ferdinand finished the job off in Granada in January of 1492. We know what else happened in 1492, don't we? Come on, guys. Hello. Everybody knows that, right? Everybody knows that. It was in your little golden book of history, taught to you probably by your football coach. Yeah, I'm not making fun of football coaches. There's a lot of really good football coach teachers, history teachers, that I met while I was in, doing substituting and things like that in the high schools around here. So after they took care of the Moors, and not to spoil the story about Columbus, after they took care of the Moors, especially Isabella, maybe her husband too, they were really devout Christians. I mean, to extremes. The Pope called them their most holy majesties when he talked about them. And the first thing that Isabella did with her husband's help is they wrote, there's the Surrender at Granada, that's kind of a romanticized one. And the palace they're at is the Alhambra Palace in Granada. And that's the Islamic leader surrendering, Muhammad the 13th. They issued the Alhambra Decree. And you can look at all the complications of it all, but the Alhambra Decree said, basically, be Catholic or be gone. So if you were a Jew over there, you had to convert. If you were an Islamic person over there, you had to convert or you had to get out of there. And eventually, it will become really strictly enforced. We'll get back to religious issues and all of that a little bit later on. Okay, now, there was this funny guy that looked like he was missing a few screws who kept knocking on the door saying, give me some money, I need some ships, I want to show you how to get to China the easy way. And he went around trying to shop this, to sell this to people in France, anybody with big money, France, Portugal said, we're busy, we've already got a route, to the Far East. Spain said, we're busy fighting the Moors, go away. I think maybe he sent emissaries up to England even. Nobody wanted to hear him. Now the fighting's over. You got Ferdinand and Isabel with a giant army, not enough money to feed them anymore, which is dangerous because what's the army know how? The only thing that an army knew how to do then was kill people, and so you want to make sure they're fed. And other problems. They spent a lot of their resources on fighting this war throughout their lives. where are we gonna get some money? Now, when old Christopher Columbus comes knocking on the door, all the science advisors and all that say, this guy is really a little bit bonkers. Don't mess with him, it'll be embarrassment to you. But finally they think, well, what the heck? It won't be our money anyway, because we don't have any. Let's get someone to sponsor him. So Isabella did not sell her jewels to finance Columbus, because she'd already sold her jewels to fight the Moors. What she did was she persuaded some people in her country to sponsor him. And he got 3 ships. I think 2 of them were caravels. Man, I wouldn't want to go across the Atlantic in a caravel. And 1 carrack. And he's going to make his first trip. And we're not going to get into details about Columbus. Someone's doing a book on Columbus, I think. Probably in 2 classes. But he made it to the Caribbean. I think he touched on the Bahamas. He touched on Cuba, which is not what they call the island then. I think they touched on the largest island that, well, what they thought was the largest island was Hispaniola. But they named it Hispaniola, strangely enough, since it was Spanish. He didn't stay long. He did a little bit of exploring, almost lost a ship. And back then, you were out in the middle of nowhere, right? You didn't want to lose your transportation. Made it back to Spain. He became an instant Spanish rock star. The Queen declared him the admiral of all the seas, promised him that he could have, kind of like Prince Henry, you can have all the profits from all of this, keep on going. And he basically thought that he'd reached the outskirts of the Indies. In fact, I think he died believing that. I kind of hope he died. He wasn't all that much of a nice guy, but I kind of hope he died believing that. You know, because it's kind of terrible to be old like me or somebody like him. I don't know how old he was, and then realize at the end of it that everything you've done was wrong. He miscalculated. He was self-educated. He understood the principles of the world's geography and all of that, but he miscalculated the circumference of the world by about 50%. Yes, ma'am. Question.
The ones that they're in band and they have to go in the band.
Yeah, I noticed when I was in the parking lot out there that there's lines drawn out there. Is that where they do the band practice? Out behind there? It's like a football field on the parking lot. Reminds me of Texas Tech. They do that there too. Okay, anyhow, he's there. Now, here's the problem. Why are they doing all of this? I mean, route to China, all those different things, but what's the sum total reason that they're going out there? The Portuguese and the Spanish. Come on, we all know what makes the world go round. Right?
Money.
Yeah. And the Portuguese are saying, we've worked at this for 100 years. We've got a monopoly on the route to China. What are those Spanish people doing? You're getting your nose in our business, guys. Now, if the Portuguese and the Spanish, and they weren't willing to go to war over it, but if they're having a big dispute, who is the only person anywhere near them who's of high enough prestige to settle a fight between them? Think about it. Who's the guy with the greatest prestige in most of Europe, especially the further south you got? Oh, come on. I'm looking at blank expressions in this room. Hail Center, someone save me post. Okay, let's talk about the powers this man had. You're going to hell.
Pope.
Ah, somebody got it right away. That was a good enough answer, right? Yeah, the Pope. So they go to the Pope. At the time, he was Italian. They go to the Pope and say, settle this fight. It's no fair. The Portuguese are complaining. The Spanish are saying you're trying to get everything all for yourself. So the Pope did kind of a Solomon-like thing. You know the story of the wisdom of Solomon and the baby. Maybe you haven't heard about it, you know. Pope draws a line right down the globe and says, let's do it this way. The Portuguese can go east from this line, and the Spanish can go west from this line. Now go away and leave me alone. And about a year later, they go and have a political negotiation, and the Pope's not involved at that stage. up in a place called Tordesillas in Spain, some little resort town, I guess. And it's funny how the politicians always get to go to resort towns to make negotiations. I have to do it in Lubbock. They get to go to Las Vegas or something like that. Anyway, they arrive at a treaty called the Treaty of Tordesillas. There it is on your slide. Point at it. Remember that one. It's 1492. This is to settle the fight between Portugal and Spain about who gets to go where. What is the logical problem with saying the Portuguese can go east from this line and the Spanish can go west from this line, so don't bother each other? What's the logical problem with that? Come on, guys. If this is supposed to be a lasting solution, how long is that going to keep the Spanish and the Portuguese apart? What's going to happen? Wake up, host. Tell me what's going to happen. They're going away from the line.
Oh, there's actually B at the other side.
I'm speaking sign language for posts because they seem to be having trouble answering. Hail Sinner, help them out.
They're gonna meet when they
No joke. And what made it even more complicated was when they got around there, it meant they kind of passed each other. So when they tried to sort it out, the line on the other side wasn't so straight. It was a little crooked. Make a long story short, the Spanish eventually got control of a place called the Philippines, and the Portuguese kept control of the Spice Islands where Ambon was. Spanish really wanted that too, but they had a try at it and didn't get it. And later on, the English and the Dutch are going to take it away from the Portuguese anyway. But that's the Treaty of Tordesillas, and the subsequent treaty is called the Treaty of Zaragoza with a Z, or Saragossa with an S, however you want to spell it, I don't care. And I'm not going to ask you about the second treaty. That happens in 1529. Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494. Now Spain, after Columbus's trip, Spanish exploration is going to explode. And I would say that, you know, even though we can't say that Columbus discovered North America or anything like that, he certainly got the rest of the world headed in that direction. He himself was given administrative jobs having to do with these islands and all that. He didn't do a very good job. He and his family that did that were pretty cruel to a lot of people, including their own people. And on one of his voyages, his own crew got so tired of him that they put him ashore and said bye. Then they changed their mind and let him go home with them under arrest. And Isabella felt a debt to him, so she took care of that for him. But he kind of died as a discredited person after all of that. There's the Pope, by the way, that solved their problem, Alexander VI. He was a member of the Borgia family. If you want to have a... Oh, sorry. There he is. Once again, Lord knows if that's what he really looked like. But the Borgias were famous. Go to Wikipedia and look up the Borgias. One of the Borgias was a lady, Lucretia Borgia, who had a big ring, and when she got tired of a husband, she'd open up the ring and dump something in his drinks and move on to the next husband. She's kind of famous for that. What? She was descended, by the way. Oh, popes don't have children. Oh, they do? Well. Anyway, she was descended from Alexander VI. There's the second voyage of Columbus. Got that memorized? Third voyage of Columbus. You notice he hits on South America that time. Fourth voyage, he's going to hit on Central America. Never gets to North America. But there are a lot of people that follow him. What do they call them? They call them the conquistadors. Remember we had the Reconquista and all these big soldiers, big time guys, you know, they're tough guys. They're going over to the Americas now. That gets rid of them. You know, Isabella's happy to see them go. Promises that they have land. we won't talk a lot of details, but they made this big promise, it would be an encomienda where you got responsibility for some land that you recovered and the Crown of Spain gave you the right to demand that the people that live there work for you. You had to protect them, but they had to work for you, and if they didn't want to work for you, they had to give you money or whatever. I always find it really, really fun that all these kings in Europe are giving away land in America where they've never been. And I'm wondering, let's see, if we did a title search, could we establish ownership there? Maybe not. Some of the most famous of the so-called conquistadors, Vasco Núñez de Balboa, after whom a lot of places are named, was one of the first people to lead an expedition across the Isthmus of Panama and to observe the Pacific in that way. Magellan, in 1519, is going to set out to circumnavigate the world. He won't make it, but his ship will. So they say he's the first man to circumnavigate the world. He died in the Philippines. Hernan Cortez, or maybe I should make you write this for an exam. Cortez de Monroy y Pizarro, or Pizarro, depending on where you come from in Spain. That's not Mexican sounding, is it? Does anybody speak Spanish? Do you speak Spanish? No? Isn't that something?
I speak a little bit.
How many people in Hale Center and Post can claim Hispanic heritage? Come on. Me? Oh, I put my hand up. Put your hand up, be proud of it. Okay, how many of you can speak Spanish? Well, there's somebody in the Hale Center waving her hand like mad back there in the back row. Who is that? Now she's waving both hands. Who is it? I can't hear.
Jocelyn.
Jocelyn, okay. Good for you, Jocelyn. I'll tell you a little secret. My wife's Vietnamese. My children can all speak Vietnamese. Hang on to the languages you get. They're valuable. I supported them for years with that. Being able to speak Vietnamese. The government came and gave me a job because I could speak Vietnamese. Not necessarily a real nice job, but anyway. Let's talk about Hernan Cortez. I think he was over on the islands that later became called Puerto Rico, but he may have been on Cuba. It's not really important to our story. But he decided, he'd heard of people who had bumped the main continent, the North American continent, over where in the area of Veracruz in Mexico. And he wanted to go over there and look around. Once again, what's his motivation? Maybe he can find something that's worth something. And according to the story, and I don't know if it's an apocryphal story or not, he was having trouble getting permission. So he cozied up to the governor's daughter, and she helped him get permission from her father. Then he dumped her and ran for his ship. And her father sent people after him to tell him, no, your permission is rescinded, but he was gone. And he's going to go roughly to where Veracruz is and make his way inland. Now he's going to stop on some islands. He's going to pick up a Spaniard who is stranded on an island who can speak some native dialects and bring along...
Your conference is scheduled to end in 2 minutes.
Some women that were with the Spaniard who could speak English, and they could also speak Nahuatl. Who could speak Nahuatl? I've already mentioned that language once before. Can you remember? The Aztecs. What did I tell you about big ferocious people that rule by fear? They have a lot of enemies. So now Cortez has the key to the door to the Aztecs because he had someone who can speak Nahuatl and show him the way. And we'll pick up there next time around. Have an absolutely wonderful weekend. Win your football games. Stay out of trouble. Get your homework done. See you next week. amount of 2 minutes of class.
Bye, Dr. Hunt.
Take care. What?
It's crazy that this is my top day. Crazy.
I wish it was my only class. I have 2 of them. Behave yourselves on Monday.
Your conference is now over. Goodbye.